Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing the album Lateralus by the band Tool.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So before anything, I'm recording this video on February 24th, 2022, and for future's sake, this is the day when Russia invaded Ukraine, or maybe it was yesterday, depends where you are honestly. But if there's anyone on here who is from Ukraine or any other of the countries like Belarus, I would just like to tell you that you should stay strong and hopefully this thing will pass as quickly as it started. Now on other news, I am trying something new with my editing, so tell me what you think about these mid sections that I'm doing in the video, and you're gonna understand what it is in just a moment because we're gonna listen to my favorite bit from this album. So this album is categorized under the post-metal subgenre. Of course, a lot of subgenres under the progressive umbrella, but this is post-metal, and it's really quite exemplary for what this subgenre means because it has really long and stretched out, songs which have simple yet not basic sections and lines played on them, which are built up one on top of the other in order to create this big crescendo at the end. And I love how this album is structured. I love the fact that you basically have a structure of having an epic song, a long song, one that really hits hard and makes you, overwhelmed by it almost. And then you have sort of a breaker song, which they're usually a shorter song, which lets you, calm down for what you've just experienced and actually digest the music and move on to the next big epic coming up. And before we get into the real review on here, I have to confess, I'm sorry, but there's one song on here which I actually knew beforehand. As always, of course, I'm reviewing these albums without knowing them beforehand, and I of course knew the unmistakable, unavoidable actually, Schism of this album. Now this song, it's great, the bass is great, and I knew it beforehand, and I think I just had this time to actually put it in context with the entire album, and I'm glad I did. Now, one moment before I actually talk musically about this album, I want to ask a serious question. Is this album actually prog? So I think experimentalism was a big motive of this album. It is really trying to expand its own narrative and ideas to untouched grounds, let's say. But I don't think that progressiveness was really the idea in mind when making this album, because it does have a simple, line of thought through most of the songs. But the fact is, they are epic, they are very, very cool, and they're built up in such a great way that it doesn't really matter if this album is not progressive. It was still a definite fun listen. And you know what? Who cares? It's just a definition. I think this album is totally deserving to be on this list. And when it comes to the music of Lateralus, although I'm pretty well known not metal fan in my own nature, I still could objectively and subjectively appreciate the music found on here. I found myself enjoying the music at times, and I also know that it's great music overall. And yes, the lack of growls did actually help me in actually connecting to this album better. Now, in my honest opinion, I think that the bass and drums are the two leading instruments when it comes to this album. I think that without them, this album wouldn't have the needed skeleton it needs to actually present the ideas it holds, and I think that those two instruments are so vital to the music on here that you cannot miss them at all. Now, of course, there's a lot of albums out there where the bass and drums basically fill the role of rhythm, and that's okay, but this album does it completely different and uses those two instruments to define the depth that this album goes to. Justin Chancellor's bass on here is really quite unique, and it has a metallic sound to it, and I don't mean that it has a metal sound to it by having the metal genre. No, I actually mean metallic, like you can hear the fact that their strings are made out of metal, and I think that's really cool, and I don't know how he gets that sound, something with a treble basically, I think, but the fact is you can always tell that it is this album's bass or this player's bass because it is such a unique sound. And Danny Carey on here is on the drums, and I think he does a fantastic job in playing, and one of the things, maybe the best thing I like about his playing, is the fact that he opts to use the bass drum and the tom-toms more than the snare and the cymbals. I think it's really easy, you know, to just use the snare as the rhythm drum and then use like the cymbals as other things, but I think the fact is he goes with the lower register drums and he makes it so there is more depth, there's more personnel to the music itself, and I think that's just one of the ways that makes his playing unique and makes all of the music found on here really unique in itself. The lead vocals on here are nuanced, the guitar sometimes sounds like Rush guitar, which is really cool because I love it, and I am really doubting whether keyboards were even needed on an album like this, because if I'm not mistaken there were no keys being played on this album, and you know what, I think they're not needed. I think this album is pretty perfect as it is, and you don't really need someone playing the keyboards if it's not really the kind of thing that you're trying to pass. Now, I won't be going in this review into the intricacies of this album because there's a lot of them. Of course, I think the one that pops to mind first is the mathematical nature of the title track Lateralus. Now, that song is completely mind-bogglingly good, and when the metal is introduced into it, it's really kind of an amazing ride, but I'm not going to talk about it. But if you want to see a video about it, there's a great video by Polyphonic that he made on that specific song, and I highly recommend for anyone to go watch that video, because if you don't know what underlies that specific song, then you probably should. Now I wish to present to you a rundown of various songs off this album that I liked and for various reasons, so let's go. The Patient. That song, I love the lyrics on it. I love the way that it represented its idea and I could connect to it on some level. I think that when it comes to the writing, I think this is the best song on this album. Parabola and Parabola, I think those two songs are basically one song. They're like transitioned so seamlessly to one another. They're basically one cohesive piece. I like them both. I think they really balance each other out and make one complete balanced track. And honestly, it just made me go, ooh, and I was like really excited to hear this one. Ticks and Leeches actually sounds like a guy being pissed off because his girlfriend dumped him. I don't know if that's the idea of it, but that's what it sounded like to me. Faip Deo Yad, I don't know if that's how you say that name. I actually don't know why that's a name of a song on here, but that song would have been my favorite if it were actually a song, but I think it's not fair to actually consider it as a melodical piece and more like this skit, although it's not funny at all. It's mostly like, you know, a thriller or even some sort of like psychological horror, and I loved it very much because it was so unexpected and it felt so real in some way. But because it's not a song and I have to choose a favorite, I'd say that my favorite song is The Grudge. The opener track, I loved it so much. I think it does its purpose correctly when it comes to being an opener. It really introduces you to what Lateralus is going to be. It just goes, this is Lateralus and enjoy yourselves, and that's truly what it is. And if not anything, the scream, the prologue scream by Keenan at the end was just breathtaking, yes, pun intended, and that made me love this song even more. So yeah, this is Lateralus, probably the most influential post-metal album there is out there, at least that I know of, and I loved it a lot, but still I'm not a big metal fan and thus I have some issues with actually connecting with it, but as I said, objectively, this fantastic album is so good. This cover is so iconic by now, like who doesn't even know about it? The imagery is just psychedelic, it's enthralling, it really doesn't let you go until you actually give this album a listen and actually experience what's on here, and until then it just keeps you very, very interested about what this album is, as it did to me. Now I know that this cover is made up, if I'm not mistaken, out of 6, stackable layers of images that form the body and the background and everything else, and I think that's a neat idea which I haven't seen a lot used in a lot of records, and I find that to be very creative. But honestly, what else can I say? This is a defining cover for the metal or post-metal genre, at least as I see it, and I think it's really, really good as it is, and it really does serve the purpose of Lateralus. So when it comes to the rating of this album, I, as I said, am not a huge metal fan, but still I can appreciate this one, and I'm gonna give it a highly deserving 7 out of 10. Now wait a second, because I think that objectively this album could easily be a 10 out of 10. If you're a metal fan and you don't know this album, or you do know this album, this is probably a perfect album for you. Honestly, if you like this type of music, there's no reason why this entire album should not be a favorite of yours. But yeah, I suppose that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this one. I had such a pleasure listening to it. I was anticipating this album, and boy was I not let down by it at all. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to be listening to Amazing Guest by the band Cheetos Magazine. A completely different thing from this album for sure, so stay tuned for tomorrow. I'll catch you all, and bye guys.